Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking fascinating linguistic research and turning it into a visual journey. We are going to look at a radical, completely fresh rereading of a deeply historical and influential text, Surah 27, known as An-Naml. For literally centuries, this text has been layered with all sorts of mystical interpretations. But recent linguistic analysis of the original Arabic root words suggests something entirely different. We're going to dive into the precise architectural structure of this text to see what it's actually trying to tell us. So let's jump right in.
It's a pretty compelling question, right? Think about it. When you strip away all those centuries of folklore, the fairy tales of flying carpets and magical wizards, what are you actually left with? Well, by examining the strict structural mechanics and the root meanings of the text, researchers argue that we uncover a highly engineered universal code. And honestly, it completely shatters the way we traditionally view human authority and material power.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the blueprint of clarity, Musa and internal certainty, Sulayman's mastery, the transparent glass palace, and finally, surrendering to reality.
All right, part 1, the blueprint of clarity. Before the text even starts telling stories, it sets up the ground rules for what an open system actually is.
Here's the really fascinating part. The text explicitly announces itself not as some cryptic clerical code that you need a special priest to decode, but as a kitab al-mubin, a totally clear, unmediated blueprint. The Arabic root byn literally means to separate, isolate, or make distinctly clear. It's establishing a self-interpreting baseline from the get-go. Guidance here isn't a secret, it's framed as an open, distinct trajectory for absolutely anyone oriented toward reality.
Moving right along to part 2, Musa and internal certainty. Our first case study drops us straight into the wilderness with Musa, or Moses, to examine human perception.
Now, when Musa brings clear signs to Pharaoh, the text says Pharaoh and his people rejected them, even though their inner selves were certain of them. The takeaway here is absolutely profound. Human opposition to the truth is rarely about just intellectual ignorance. It's a deliberate act of cognitive dissonance. The specific word used is juhud, which means denying what you internally undeniably know to be true. It reveals that tyranny at its core is essentially just a psychological defense mechanism, built entirely to protect an artificial, ungrounded hierarchy. So forget the traditional folklore about some wizard's magic trick. When we look at the linguistic root John, it reveals something completely different, hidden kinetic forces operating right beneath our immediate human perception. It proves that what looks static and lifeless to us actually possesses these latent, systemic dynamics governed by massive universal laws.
Okay, part 3, Sulayman. This is all about mastery, definitely not magic, as we arrive at the biggest narrative in the surah and tear down some deeply entrenched mythologies.
Whenever we hear the word jinn, popular imagination instantly jumps straight to a blue genie popping out of a lamp. But if you look at the actual root words, jinn simply refers to concealed forces or highly specialized agents operating just beneath the surface of immediate perception. The text is describing an advanced mastery over natural systemic mechanics, not arbitrary supernatural magic.
Just look at how his dominion is actually organized. It's highly categorized into concealed physical operations, manifest human or civic operations, which is known as ins, and tear, which refers to swift high-altitude scanning trajectories, basically aerial intelligence. Sulayman is operating this meticulously compartmentalized, highly functional systemic framework. He's not running some mystical petting zoo. He is managing a brilliantly coordinated universal system.
And that brings us to the famous story of the ant. Instead of a fairy tale talking bug, the text uses the word mantiq, which means logical output or communicative frequencies. The ant's warning represents micro-level ecosystem data. It demonstrates a massive systemic truth: grand power is inherently blind. It will literally crush its own environment by accident if it doesn't process the feedback loops of conscious, deliberate care.
So how does Sulayman actually respond to picking up this micro-level data frequency? He smiles. His immediate reaction to processing this ecological feedback loop is profound gratitude. There's zero arrogance of a tyrant here. His faculties remain tethered to evolutionary growth and alignment with reality. He fully recognizes his processing power as a gift that requires thankfulness, not just a tool for blind domination.
Which brings us to part 4, the transparent glass palace. This builds into an ultimate paradigm shift regarding materialism.
So Bilqis, the queen of Saba, or Shiva, has this incredibly prosperous society, right? But here's their fatal structural flaw. They worship the mechanisms of physical energy, specifically the sun, rather than the originator of those mechanisms. By aligning their consciousness purely with the visible ecosystem, they've basically blinded themselves to the unmediated, deeper reality running beneath the whole shebang.
Sulayman tests this materialist society through a direct confrontation of structural intelligence. When the queen's throne needs to be brought to him, a concealed physical force offers to do it quickly. But then, an agent possessing al-kitab, precise knowledge of the universal blueprint, does it instantly. The mind-bending realization here is that systemic knowledge of the divine code inherently supersedes raw material force. It completely bypasses temporal and physical constraints. Just like that.
The real turning point happens when the queen enters Sulayman's architectural space. Picture this. She walks onto this polished floor, a sarh, and she actually hitches up her dress because she perceives it to be a deep, unstable pool of water. But she is informed it's actually a highly engineered, totally solid foundation of clear glass. This architectural space is just a brilliant physical metaphor for transparency. It reveals that deep reality only appears unstable until you view it through an unmarred, perfectly clear lens.
Faced with this undeniable structural clarity, an architecture that renders the invisible completely visible and solid, her externalized, materialist paradigm just shatters entirely. She immediately realizes her error in perception. Her declaration here is one of complete, total, systemic surrender directly to the sustainer of all systems of reality. Now pay close attention to the exact wording here, because it is absolutely crucial. She surrenders with Sulayman. This means Sulayman was merely a conduit for clarity. He was never the object of submission himself. Her surrender is an unmediated alignment alongside him as an equal conscious agent. It totally dismantles the entire idea of clerical or human mediation between the individual and ultimate reality.
And finally, Part 5, Surrendering to Reality. Let's systematize what all these sweeping narratives and root-word analyses actually prove about the human condition.
If we pull all of this together, we can completely deconstruct that old ritual matrix. We've substituted magic tricks for latent kinetic laws, and fairy tale talking animals for real ecosystem feedback loops. Teleportation becomes mastery of the universal code, and the Grand Palace becomes a stunning metaphor for perceptual transparency. We have literally replaced magical thinking with absolute systemic order.
The text actually outlines who can successfully interface with this transparent system. It isolates these three natural baseline dynamics: systemic security, or iman, continuous functional alignment, or salat, and evolutionary contribution, or zakat. And it frames these not as rigid, institutionalized religious performances that you just check off a list, but as the continuous dynamic functions of a conscious self that is truly oriented toward consequence.
Ultimately, the explainer of this source text argues that Islam, translated here as surrender, is not an institution or an exclusive club you join. It is simply the natural orientation of those who recognize the truth when it is made completely manifest. The messenger's only job is to recite the clear blueprint, because you simply cannot force someone to surrender to reality if they deliberately choose cognitive dissonance. Recognition is always an internal, individual responsibility. We've seen today how stripping away the folklore reveals a highly engineered architecture of consciousness and the universe. So I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to consider. If reality is an open ledger and the signs are structurally embedded in the world all around us, how does this alter your understanding of your own stewardship? Take a moment to consider the unmediated reality beneath absolutely everything you perceive and what it actually means to truly align with it.